Hi, welcome to Watcher DM. I'm Gabriel. Today I am beginning my journey into the book of the Tome of World Building by Matt Finch, a huge volume about making worlds I think for fantasy mostly, but I am sure that you could find lots of ways to do this. And they even put a hex page at the back here with nice little hexes. Thanks, Matt. You're great. First, before we dive into this series, so this is a continuation of the Tome of World Building kind of tutorial series. I'm going to be going through this entire book, basically one section at a time. Today, I think it's actually going to be a lot of reading and not so much table use, just because I want to kind of set up the expectations for how this book is used, which is mostly what the introduction kind of chapter 1 is about. I also want to talk briefly about the construction of this book, as it does deviate a bit from the Tome of Adventure Design. First, I think it is a bit shorter. It's 350 pages of counted pages, I think, starting just after. Yeah, so it starts on page 14. So I think the first page is probably this guy here, or maybe it goes to 52 with everything included. 352. But the pages, one of the notable characteristics here, and you may notice this just on if you look at this video and you look at the Tome of World Building or Tome of Adventure Design videos, the pages are a matte finish, which for photography and filming, this is huge improvement. This is a big improvement. So thank you, Matt, for doing that. I think this is going to make it a lot easier to go through this series. A couple of the features you will notice, again, we have our spark tables down the side. Now, I have not gone through and checked this, but I am curious if these are brand new spark tables. If they are, that is a pretty astounding amount of new sparks to add, with features like the goddess of worms and civilization. The goddess of worms and civilization. Like, oh man, what is built in the backs of worms? Like, that's amazing. There's so much in that. I love it. Fobola Forest, Castle of the Elder Duke, Formation of a League, Collapsed while under construction. These are great. I'm already impressed with the spark tables, much more than I was with the Tome of Adventure Design spark tables. So I don't know if you guys got feedback about those or what. Now, that said, so the inner construction of the book is fantastic. Of course, the construction of this book is just like the Tome of Adventure Design, amazing. It's stitch bound, very, very solid construction with a nice kind of satin, almost, what do they call that, soft touch laminate kind of finish. And then it's got some beautiful glossy embossing on it that gives a real luster as the light plays across the important characters of the cover. So, beautiful book, very well constructed. Let's dive in. So, Chapter 1, Introduction, How to Use this book. The first way to use this book is as a walkthrough procedure for building a world, which is probably the way most readers will initially approach it, and especially the way most first-time world builders will begin. You can start at the beginning of the book and follow the process through. The second way to approach the book, though, is to use it as an idea generator for selected parts of the world-building process, dipping into the book for inspiration rather than following it as a procedural manual. Many people have map-making or map designing skills that eclipse anything random tables can suggest for map-making. Others are brilliant at creating prophecies and stories to fill in the background tapestry of a fantasy world. I would venture to say that anyone running a fantasy role-playing game can probably outdo the creative results from this book in at least one area of world design. Despite the fact that the book is presented as a procedural sequence, it's actually designed more for the experienced world builder who needs an inspiration tool from time to time in the process. It's always easier to create from something on the page than it is from nothing, and random generation tables are particularly good for this because you can see all the surrounding results on the table, along with whatever results you actually rolled with the dice. These ideas are placed into tables rather than lists, So you can get a random kick in the pants starting point with the dice, but the moment an inspiration draws you away from the die roll, follow that inspiration. As I have said at the end of many an introduction, imagine the hell out of it. That's damn right, Matt. Imagine the hell out of it. That's great advice. All right, following the plan. If your objective is to start at the beginning and work your way through, here's a brief walkthrough of the chapters with their primary objectives. I love this. This is a great introduction. Thanks for giving us a breakdown. So, Chapter 1 is obviously this that we're in. Chapter 2 is the starting point, which is where you can resolve a few matters that are cosmic in nature but may affect the world. This is mainly about the nature of alignments and whether they are forces that will have an effect, but the chapter also suggests generating a particular book or books that will offer cosmic level history when needed. So this is kind of your Bible generation chapter in a way, and kind of helps with that, which I think is good, but also I do personally prefer when mythology is that it's myth, it's mythological. So unconcretized or clearly false or conflicting stories about the creation of the world or the origins of things, I think is a very exciting place to explore in fantasy. And so yeah, I would probably do some of that. This might be a good place for me to generate a couple of mythologies that are competing to get adherence to their worldview. Chapter 3 addresses continents and a past cataclysm, as well as a discussion about temperature zones, which may be important when creating the map. So this is cool. I like the idea of embedding past cataclysms. I especially like the idea of multiple past cataclysms, like, just we think about the Ice Age as like a big cataclysm, but of course, many cultures in our planet have a global flood as a past cataclysm. We also have the cosmological event that extincted the dinosaurs. I think there's also like a really crazy cataclysm where like the oxygen went through the roof or like killed basically 90% of the life in the ocean or something. So there's a lot of different types of cataclysms, and you can imagine some of those having some record, especially in a world where, the only intelligent life that writes things down isn't people. Chapter 4 is an odd chapter because a lot of the material in it is covered in greater detail elsewhere. As a procedural step, though, it's very helpful. Basically, this chapter generates a few details about all the other continents that aren't starting points. This information is very useful when building the home continent because it gives you information about the faraway influences that affect the home continent. So that's really interesting. They go kind of right into the neighboring continents. Chapter 5 is the main course for creating the home continent. In this chapter, you create cultures with their borders to other cultures, those borders mostly being wilderness areas of the world. The culture's political organizations are defined, together with historical turning points, religion, and many other cultural level details. Chapter 6 focuses on countries. You will already have information about the culture at this point, but this is where you can generate population numbers and lots of other details at a country-by-country level. Chapter 7 brings us back to the wilderness. You may already have dipped into this chapter while generating borders, but this chapter lets you create themes and situations that exist in the wilderness rather than civilization. Chapter 8 addresses international groups and conspiracies that may affect the world. Chapter 9 and onward are basically reference chapters used to fill in different types of detail when you begin fleshing out the world. Chapter 9 is about legendary locations, a result that is called by many of the tables in preceding chapters. So it sounds like we got something in Chapter 9 that we're going to want to bookmark and maybe refer to as we're building up to it. So that'll be cool. Chapter 10 is about cities and settlements, containing various tables that will help when you reach this level of detailing the world. Chapter 11 is about deities and religion, a chapter referenced numerous times in Chapter 2 through 8. Another good one. Chapter 12 is about the big personalities you'll need to bring life to the world. So I think this is kind of our NPC generator. Chapter 13 is about mythical places that are mostly located in other planes of existence, but are needed for mythologies and the occasional dialed to 11 sort of location. Chapter 14 is about monstrous leaders who are invoked in many of the world generation tables. Finally, Chapter 15 contains various useful facts that didn't really fit into the rest of the book. Most of this is real-world data information. That's so cool. So then we get into a little discussion about the genres and approaches. I'm not going to read all of this out loud, but I just want to kind of go over what they've got here. So they're talking about sword and sorcery. They're talking about heavy metal. They're talking about grim and gritty. And then I think they have a little bit here about high fantasy. And then a whole section on high magic versus low magic. So in several places in the book, there are references to particular types of worlds based on different fantasy genres. These are sword and sorcery, heavy metal, grim and gritty, also occasionally called grimdark, and high fantasy. Clearly, there's a lot of overlap between these genres, and defining them is highly subjective. But he does kind of give it a shot. He talks about some good distinctions between them. I'm not going to read all of this. And then high versus low magic, high magic versus low magic. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about how low magic versus high magic worlds, which I suspect dates back all the way to 2nd edition D&D, when the Forgotten Realms began to replace Greyhawk as the default setting for Dungeons & Dragons. The Forgotten Realms is a relatively high magic world, where magic simply stands in for a lot of modern technology. There's a sense that any threat to civilization can be addressed by a wizard establishing contact by the magical equivalent of a telephone and recruiting the help of a world-spanning organizations. Of course, the evil has similar magical resources, so it's not a matter of a difference in power, it's more a matter of the communication and coordination. The Forgotten Realms, at least in its later iterations, is a world where threats are generally addressed with lots of coordinated, worldwide responses. Greyhawk, by contrast, has a much more medieval feel. The countries are relatively isolated, and there's the feel that magical communication is extremely rare. The idea of a coordinated international response to a world-spanning threat in Greyhawk is laughable. It's worthy of note that the Forgotten Realms is probably a much better extrapolation of what would happen with the D&D rules, and it would be difficult to explain why the world of Greyhawk doesn't have the same sort of communication and coordination, given that AD&D is quite a high magic game. Nevertheless, as a world setting, it's my opinion that the world of Greyhawk benefits from the fact that Gary Gygax didn't extrapolate the underlying rules of the game into the world setting. For whatever reason, the high magic level of the game doesn't creep into the feel of the world setting, and the world setting tends to benefit from that. The tables in these books have the potential to be relatively high magic. Various interesting types of magic are proposed as the cause of many threats, opportunities, and bits of history. However, even in a low magic world, magic at the level of politics and nations would have a significant effect. The real distinctions between low and high magic in a game comes from the rules being used. If magic items are common and spellcasters are common, the rules, if extrapolated, will suggest that the world should also be high magic. So, the solution is either 1. To pick a rule set that supports a low magic world, or 2. Come up with a reason why a plentitude of wizards and magic items doesn't manage to transform medieval level communications and lack of international cooperation into a more modern feeling world. The first level of this answer is that it just doesn't. Since we're not novelists writing books, there doesn't need to be consistency at all levels. It's enough to just say that distrust or secrecy keep coordination and communication from reaching modern levels, and in fact, Gary Gygax was quite clear that wizards are very secretive. He just didn't give a good reason for it. A second level to the answer is that there's a slowly accumulating risk to the everyday use of magic. A player character's wizard isn't using magic enough to suffer the risk, but a city wizard casting multiple spells a day, day in and day out, would begin to erode from the unnatural nature of the activity. This kind of explanation, which doesn't interfere with the rules, usually works like a charm, and it has the added benefit of adding a bit of Cthulhu-esque vibe to the world, plus an explanation as to why a player character wizard doesn't just pick up a lot of extra cash on the side by casting spells for people. I like this. I'm really stoked that he wrote this, and I want to talk about this for just a moment before we go on. Some ideas for reasons that you might have a low magic world. Maybe there is only so many wizards that can be alive at a time. Like, to have another wizard requires that a previous wizard has died. This actually works pretty well with the Vancian magic system, where kind of spells live in the head of a wizard as almost like an entity or an organism. So you could imagine wizardry being almost like possession or some kind of entity that lives within the person, and there's only so many of those entities in existence. There will never be more or less, theoretically, and it is when a wizard dies that a new wizard can be born and trained. Or even transferred. which might be an interesting way to do it. I also really like the idea that the use of magic repeatedly causes a negative effect to the wizard, but also could cause a negative effect to the world. We see this in Dark Sun with the Defiler magic, and I think it's a pretty effective way, although you have to realize that your PCs are not necessarily going to do what's right by the world if it doesn't help them. So look out for that. Anyway, just a couple of ideas, parting ideas on that first chapter. I hope you enjoyed checking out the beginning of the Tome of World Building. I look forward to building a world with you on this series. I hope you'll hit like. I hope you'll hit subscribe, bell icon to be notified. And yeah, go check out the Patreon or go to watcherdm.com and sign up for the mailing list if you want to get access to a bunch of our other creative projects. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for playing. See you in the next one.